Good morning, everyone. It's 9 a.m. on the East Coast here in USA. And I'm Scott Ratson. I'm happy to be hosting this webinar. I'm going to give it about 60 seconds while I'm seeing people are still being let in. We have well over 100 people, as well as two great participants as speakers. So I'll just wait till people have the opportunity to get in our Zoom world for a webinar, and we'll have everything active in terms of the Q&A that will be available. So good morning, I'm Scott Ratson. I'm the Executive Director of Business Partners to Convince, which is an initiative of the U.S. Council for International Business Foundation. We've been pleased to be focusing on activities related to the COVID new vaccine information, communication, and engagement, which is what our Convince title stands for. And in that, we've had a series of webinars, this being one of our prime ones that we're pleased that you can join today. So I'm going to jump right to our next slide and remind what our group is about and what Business Partners to Convince is. It's an organization that has, again, been supported by the U.S. Council for International Business Foundation. We have worked on other activities, including Business Partners for Sustainable Development. And in this, we have come up with a statement of shared purpose with members of our steering committee, as well as others that are part of our Business Industry Advisory Council. And you can see on the bottom, there's a number of logos here, and we're pleased that two representatives are here today for this webinar. But I'm going to spend just a moment to read this because I think this is so key and so important and has not changed. And in fact, is probably more important than ever on the role of business in the COVID pandemic response. Business is a trusted source of information, well suited to engage, inform, and educate workers, their families, and communities with a message that inspires confidence in vaccination and encourages acceptance and uptake as COVID-19 vaccines become available. Therefore, we pledge to hear concerns, listen to feedback, and develop vaccine literacy strategies based on science, facts, and emerging information to counter hesitation and vaccination opponents through communication and education initiatives at the global, national, and local levels. And as you can see, you may know many of those logos: the International Organization of Employers, the International Chamber of Commerce, business at the OECD, the Australian Chamber, the International Federation of Pharmaceutical Manufacturers Associations, and as others that you may know. I would like to just say that Wilton Park, which is a unit of the UK Foreign Commonwealth Development Office, the Vaccine Confidence Project, and the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, along with my role at CUNY School of Public Health, had been the founding members of this global initiative called Convince. And we're pleased that both of them also participate in our steering committee. But having said that, let's go right to the essence of why we're all here today. We're here with two of the experts that we're fortunate to have join, Emily Dickens and Brittany Sakata. The nice part, if I can say that, is we are in the most timely phase, if I can say, of how employees and employers are engaged. And for those of you living in the United States, you've probably seen the leader of SHRM all over the media, whether it's CNN and national networks, and also a number of groups, including the American Staffing Association and others, able to comment on what's been going on in terms of the discussion on mandates, requirements, and all the other aspects as more and more companies are, shall we say, joining the bandwagon or leading the way to have vaccine requirements at the office, as well as throughout some of their networks, as it's so important to get people vaccinated to get us back to where we hopefully will be with a robust economy again. So without further ado, I'm first going to introduce Brittany and then go right into questions. Brittany Sakata is a former labor and employment attorney who advises members on a broad range of matters, including equal employment opportunity and wage and hour laws, immigration, OSHA, and paid leave issues. She's a principal ASA liaison to the Temporary Worker Safety Alliance at OSHA, the Office of Disability Employment Policy Alliance, and ASA's Employment Safety Committee. She graduated from George Mason University and earned a JD from Washington College of Law at American University. We're fortunate to also have Emily Dickens, the Chief of Staff and the Head of Government Affairs and Corporate Secretary at the Society for Human Resource Management, also known as SHRM. Emily is an attorney with significant and progressive experience in government, higher education, and the not-for-profit sector. At SHRM, she's oversight for implementing the CEO's vision, corporate governance, global outreach, government affairs, and the organization's real property. She serves on the executive board of the North American Human Resource Management Association, Secretary General of the World Federation of People Management Associations, and a representative of the 2021 Group of 20, the G20 Employment and Education Task Force, as well as the Special Initiative of Women's Economic Empowerment at the B20, the Business 20. She's a member of the leadership team at University of North Carolina System, the Association of Governing Boards of Colleges and Universities, and the Thurgood Marshall College Fund. We are really pleased to have many people on to listen to our two excellent speakers. And I'm going to turn to them. I think we're going to change the screen to live, which is great to see them. And I'm going to ask the first question to each of them. And what we'd like them both to do is answer the question, and then I'll continue to move on. Again, the Q&A function is open, and we will get to Q&A at the end, but I have a number of questions that I'm pleased to ask and start with. And it's just very fundamental of both of these institutions and organizations have a global remit, more with, shall we say, with SHRM, but ASA will also answer in their realm of understanding. So I'm going to first go to you, Emily, if okay, as Chief of Staff of SHRM, and say, what are the main challenges and opportunities for employers to safely return employees to the workplace?
Wow, so thank you. And first, I just want to say hello to all of you who are joining us, especially our HR professionals and business executives and leaders who've been making the difficult decisions each day to protect the health, safety, and welfare of our employees over the last 17 months. So let's talk about some opportunities, right? We talk about was a great opportunity for us internally and for other organizations to test the strength of your emergency response systems. So what do I mean by that? We have a crisis team, which here is led by me, the Chief of Staff, but it also has the CHRO, the CMO, Chief Legal Officer, the Director of our buildings, right? We were always prepared for different types of crises. You think about if you have to evacuate your building or things of that nature. What we learned was we were pretty decently prepared for something like this. The key person you needed to have, as we were all thinking about people working remotely and having to shut down office, was our Chief Technology Officer, right? And whether we were prepared to be able as an organization to work fully remote. So what I tell everyone here is this was an opportunity to see whether you've got the team in place that when something else like this happens, because we know this is not, we're on to the next normal, right? But something else is going to happen. That's the first piece. Do you have the team in place to lead you? Number two, this is an opportunity to benefit from spontaneity. Right? Those we're looking at the return to office. You're thinking of people have been not dormant, but they've been home. Getting people back to offices now is 5 minutes. I need 5 minutes just to see you. I've had this idea that's been percolating. And then you bring the other person over and you're all talking about things. I think we are now so willing and ready to share new ideas. This is another great opportunity to return and benefit from spontaneity. And then I also think this is an opportunity to also reinforce company culture. We talk about this a lot at SHRM, but people should know what their company expects of them and vice versa, and what type of culture they have. And they need to intimately experience the environment, the mission, the vision. At SHRM, we call it our guiding principles. And they need to know, it signals who, if you're hiring the right people, if the right people are choosing you. And so here's that opportunity to kind of reinforce the company culture that you all have been so proud of. Now, here's the biggest challenge: workplace equity. With people, you're going to see possibly the creation of two different cultures for remote workers and on-site workers. We're already seeing some of those issues. And just think that's on top of all the other issues that came about in this crisis period. Don't forget, there were 3 crises that, in addition to the pandemic, we had the crises related to the economy, and then we had the crises related to racial injustice that trickled into the workplace, because then we had companies saying we need to look more at our inclusion and diversity initiatives, right? So now layer that on top of them trying to address those issues, and now to ensure that the people who are working remotely feel just as included and thought about and considered for opportunities. So I think workplace equity is going to be a huge challenge. Acclimating your new hires, also a very new challenge, especially people who were hired during COVID. And then maintaining employee confidentiality. As we're talking about about vaccinations and vaccination records and things of that nature, how do you make sure that you are protecting the business, but also protecting the confidentiality of the individuals who are sharing with you their personal information? And I know my colleague will probably talk more about this EEOC guidance. I'm not going to talk, but there are legal things you want to consider when you're talking about the confidentiality.
Oh, thank you for that start, Emily and Brittany.
Yeah, I will jump with opportunities first. I liked how Emily did that because I think it's always better to lead with a positive. And I think we're really at a point where perhaps once in a generation, we have that opportunity to really reimagine how people work. And, you know, in the 1800s, it was the Industrial Revolution. In the 90s, it was the technology revolution and in the beginning of the digital age. And now, as we look at 2021, there's this whole reimagining of the workplace, and it's a chance to create new and effective operating models, really hitting on those things that Emily talked about. What works well, what can we adopt to make sure going forward, this company is where people want to be, because it really is, you know, an employees market, right? Much like it is a seller's market right now, it's an employees market, and employees have opportunities to reimagine their business needs and where they want to be personally and professionally, both physically and professionally. And so it's a really unique time for employers to look at what's important to their workers and really take that into consideration. As we look at culture within ASA, you know, we've looked at opportunities to engage the community. Obviously, this pandemic has had a disparate impact on certain areas and populations, definitely in the United States. And so we've looked at ways we can take our workforce, which largely transitioned pretty seamlessly into a remote environment, but keep them engaged with our local community. We've done art supply drives for inner city groups that do art therapy for children who are the victim of gun violence in their family. We're looking at right now a school supply drive, things that our staff can do from their homes as they look at returning, but stay engaged with the community that they'll be returning to. And so that's, I think, some of the opportunities that we've seen. The challenges, of course, are huge. You know, the rapidly changing nature of the laws and guidance, and certainly of the pandemic. You know, we saw the up and down curve of cases, and we thought they were going down, and now, unfortunately, they're going up. And it's changing employers' approaches to return to work. The state and federal laws changing rapidly. Guidance documents from federal agencies such as OSHA and the CDC and the EEOC. All important employer-driven guidance documents, but they change rapidly. And so employers are having to navigate very difficult circumstances. I really feel for our employer community. Laws like the Americans with Disabilities Act, you know, that's a tough law to comply with, and employers who never really had to deal with it at a level that they're having to do now on a number of employees. You know, it was one thing to navigate the reasonable accommodation process with like an employee with a bad back, but now they're doing it based on mental health concerns and long haul COVID symptoms. And so it's just a really challenging environment for employers to navigate and for employees to return to. So we're looking for ways to support our members. We're looking for ways to find those opportunities to make and staff feel good about returning to work, but it's definitely a unique time, Scott.
Yeah, well, Brittany, you've raised many of the challenges as I asked, and great opportunities to hear what you've been doing in the community. But how also have you managed to return to a safe workplace? What have you and your organization done to get to the point where you are now?
Yeah, you know, I think that transparency is really important here. Employees are expecting a level of transparency that was never voiced or expected before. And so they want to hear what employers are doing to ensure the workplace is safe. They want to know what virus mitigation strategies are being implemented. They expect training on those measures, and they expect accountability when their colleagues don't follow it. And so we are working on ensuring that policies and procedures are well thought out and shared. We're hosting town halls with our staff and encouraging our members to do the same. inviting specialists, epidemiologists to talk about the vaccine and the science behind it, and to answer questions. The questions that we receive in town halls are really varied, and you don't expect them, but that's really important, right? Because you want to hear the various concerns. No employee is alike, and we're learning now that our employees are dealing with varied circumstances at home. We're going to talk later, I know, in the program about how this pandemic has impacted women and disadvantaged communities, communities of color. And we're hearing, from employees that we didn't really hear about before. I'm actually caring for my elderly mother. I have children who I can't put in summer camp because our local summer camps are capped at sizes due to social distancing restrictions. And so the conversations are suddenly two ways, which I think is really important. And it really lends to that transparency issue.
Yep. No, excellent, Brittany. What you called transparency and town halls and basically big time communication. And it sounds like that's been something that's helped your success. And we're trying to help do the same. And Emily, where are you in your organization? I know you were one of the first, so I'll let you carry on it.
So as an employer and the voice of all things work, SHRM thought that we should take it upon ourselves to figure out early in this process how we could safely return. So we returned to the workplace twice during the pandemic, first in June of 2020. So we went out in March, and by June of 2020, we felt we could return our US-based headquarters and our Alexandria headquarters. We have 2 buildings. So we knew we had about 300 or so employees that we could safely accommodate in those 2 buildings. And we stayed in the workplace until Thanksgiving with no workplace-based incidents. Now, again, communication was very key. That crisis team I talked to you earlier about, we spent a lot of time together in the months of April and May talking about how do we lay out a process that will make people feel comfortable about returning to the office. And to be clear, those that had other responsibilities, caregiving responsibilities, or were likely because of personal health conditions to be in a higher risk, they were allowed to remain remote. But we brought back the majority of the members of our Alexandria office staff in June. We took a break as we saw the numbers, the ebbs and flows. So we saw right around the holidays, around Thanksgiving, we were seeing a surge. And so since it was right around the holidays, we said, look, we'll remain closed until MLK Day. So everyone goes home right before Thanksgiving. And then we extended that until March 1st. Which was great. We all came back, and we've been back in the offices again since March 1st. It has been really about continuing to tell our people our mission is about elevating HR in the world of work, and to be able to say to our members, this can be done. We know that there are people who are in much larger organizations and maybe they don't own their buildings. And we know that there were some things we have that others don't, but we were able to get everyone here safety, not have any workplace instances. Not that we didn't have people who did catch COVID, but they caught COVID and they could trace it to when and who they were with when they caught it. And it was always outside of work. And I tell you that makes it a lot easier for people to say, be conscious of their circles and who they're around and things of that nature. So I just feel like we have a highly educated workplace. Now, more recently, as we'll talk more about vaccination, we're at about 80% vaccination at our headquarters now. And just this week, we began the process that if you're not vaccinated, you do have to wear the N95 mask while you're here, and you have to be tested twice a week. And that is uploaded into our confidential system. And it really is, when our staff found out that 80% of the people here were vaccinated, for them, it was, okay, what are you all going to do to keep us safe now that we know it's not 100%? I don't think it'll ever be 100%, but I think that we're in that phase now of how do we continue to protect the people who are now vaccinated to make sure we don't have any issues.
Well, let me commend you first publicly here to reach the 80%, as well as it sounds like a sound evidence-based policy of what you're doing for those who are not vaccinated at this point. What other issues have come up that were amongst the challenges when you were open and reopening?
Well, I'll tell you, Brittany, you mentioned it. Mental health is important. And what we realized is we needed to invest in a better support system. So you all are aware of, most of you have an EAP system that really supplements your healthcare system. Our HR team looked at it and said it wasn't enough. So they changed vendors. and they change to a vendor that keeps that the people who you're calling on the other end are trained, master's degree and higher in actually talking to you and trying to figure out the best course of action for your situation. We thought that and I think for other companies, you might want to think about, investing in a stronger set of support services there. The other thing I want to make sure I tell you all is, as employers, you've got to give yourself a little grace. We won't be able to solve every individual problem. And as you said, there's been so much focus on the fact that women in the workplace are having issues and that they have to be childcare issues too. But I also want you all to recognize there are single dads. Our CEO is a single dad without a nanny. Sometimes Taylor comes home from school and Taylor is in our office, right? You understand, I'm on an executive team with about 9 men who are all dads in varying ages. It's been so interesting to hear their stories with the kids in college and who they had to bring home and things of that nature, right? So I want us to all think about, there's so many stories. We'll never be able to address all the issues. So if we think high level and try to think what will work for the most people here, what can we do to do that? I always tell people, we all have older parents, and you mentioned the caregiving responsibilities. We never knew who was taking care of that, but we have people taking care of spouses, and so it's just so important I know you're going to hear so much about, the special issues we see for some women, but I also tell other women, all of this focus on childcare and child issues, also the triggering women who've never been able to have kids for whatever reason. And we're hearing that that mental health issue is coming up too. So just being really supportive and overall saying, we have a support system here. We may not be able to address every issue, but find the things that can help address the most issues.
Yep. No, well said, Emily. And the EAP, the Employee Assistance Program, is an interesting approach. Of course, it's important for mental health, but much broader, as you explained it. Brittany, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, Emily hit the nail on the head when she talked about grace, right? I mean, I think one of the biggest benefits of this pandemic is people feel more comfortable saying, I have a childcare issue, or I have a vulnerable member of my family at home and I need to be available to them, or I might not be able to come in to the extent there's a contact tracing. I have to err on the side of caution. The dog's barking in the background, the kid whose head pops in the middle of a Zoom meeting, that's suddenly normalized. I think a lot of the things that we as a society like to kind of hide before. And I think that is a good thing. And grace is really important as employers talk with employees and address, I think, what is the biggest issue, which is fear, right? What's the workplace going to look like if you haven't come back yet? If I do come back and there is an exposure, what's the next steps? And that goes to that emergency management piece of the puzzle. And I think communication, again, going back to that idea of transparency, letting employees know that you hear them, you understand their concerns, you have a plan in place, and you're going to follow the guidelines. To the extent you can point to federal and local health and safety guidelines, that takes away the ambiguity, and it doesn't feel arbitrary, and employers can say, oh, okay, I understand the steps, right? And if employees understand the steps, and if they come back and they know there's an exposure, they know who's going to be notified and how. They know the timeline. I'll hear within 24 hours. I'll hear within 48 hours, depending on what the state requires. These are all really important things for employees to know to hopefully minimize that fear. And then once they're back, continuing those conversations. We see that this is a challenging time for you employees. We have an EAP. We have an online app that you can utilize. There's so many new and amazing tools out there that are virtual that didn't exist before. Again, I think a positive of the pandemic is that there are new resources that employers can add to their toolbox to ensure that employees feel safe, heard, have an outlet to the extent that there are fears and concerns or mental health issues that need to be addressed. So I do feel like this falls in the opportunity bucket.
Yeah. And Brittany, both you and Emily have mentioned this team or crisis team or executive team to address this. Who in the organization is best suited for that? And how in your organizations have you seen these teams emerge and engage and be successful?
Yeah, it's a great question, Scott. I think that obviously the C-suite is going to be involved, but employers should not shy away from creating work groups of other levels in the organization. I always say 2020 was the year of task forces, right? Like I served on like 100 task forces in various organizations, several of which were within our organization at ASA. And it was made up, our return to work task force was made of our front desk receptionist, who's amazing, and would really be, sort of that front line of greeting contractors and greeting independent contractors that came into the office. The UPS guy, and would, be doing the temperature checks and making a log of who came in and when. And then our CEO's executive assistant, who's also amazing and really understood meetings and events and how to coordinate maximum numbers of people in the kitchen and in the office or in the conference room, and then me, who had the legal background. And so I think the three of us really brought different perspectives. Obviously, we have different backgrounds. Some of us have kids, some of us are dealing with aging parents. And so we were able to put together policies that we thought represented a better cross-section than perhaps just the C-suite could have done alone. And then we had the buy-in of the C-suite who really sat down and listened to our thoughts and concerns and looked at our suggested policies and procedures and helped us adopt and then do the training on it. So I think it's not a time to minimize input, right? It's a time to reach out and say, I want to hear from you, workers of all levels, and to take into consideration all these little pieces, because when you forget a piece, that's when someone feels unheard, and that's when someone feels unsafe.
Oh. So we had it slightly differently, right? As chief of staff, part of my role is to lead our crisis team. And so as you said, our real property reports up through me. That's our administrative services team. So I have a director of admin services who's a whole team. And I'll tell you, even when we were remote, he and his team were in this building every day. So they were the ones who were getting the building physically ready. So he, as our director, was on that. But then communications are so important. Our chief marketing and experience officer is a key part of our team, so that our internal comms person reports to her. And so how we communicated both internally and externally was crucial. And so that leadership team was made up mostly of people who are members of our C-suite, right? And then, of course, I told you the chief technology officer, the chief legal officer, who was our connection with the city of Alexandria, with the state officials and things of that nature, to make sure as rules were changing that we were up to speed with that. And then also, of course, our chief human resources officer, because the key group that he needed to communicate to after we made all the decisions were the people managers. We talk about this a lot at SHRM, but your people managers are your first line of defense when you're talking about communicating efforts like this, and they have to carry the message. And sometimes it is, we have 6 guiding principles, and number 6 is you have to push back to move forward. So we relied upon the people managers to push back, to say, consider this. But once we've made a final decision, they have to carry the decision of the team down to their people. And I think that's so critical. Another day, we'll talk about all the other critical roles of a people manager. But in this type of instance, this is the person you talk to each day who is the closest person you to other than your colleagues. And those, to me, are the front line of defense. So getting them involved and getting them to spread the message and be clear and communicate why we were making those decisions with the C-suite level team was the way that we managed it.
Yeah. So Emily, do any of those strategies that you just mentioned of how it trickled down, how did you deal with the requirements to return to work or the mandate for the vaccine piece that you mentioned earlier? How are those integrated in?
So the same way, right? The same policy that we developed so for us to return on June 1st, we've used that same document and continue to update it. It sits on our SHRM in, I think you all have an internal communications site, and it sits there. Updates are regularly given. We have something called on Mondays, we have something called the look ahead that goes out with announcements. So anytime there's an update to that. So literally this week, last week, there was an update to this document, that's living, breathing document that we've been updating, saying, here are the new rules regarding vaccination and regarding those who are unvaccinated in the workplace. So that document, again, I always say anything that happens next, we'll be able to see all the stages of what that document had to go through as we've done this return to office. And again, people continue to recommend other things, but it's one place where people can go get all the information. The other piece we've been doing is we've been steady hiring, right? And so in orientation, explaining to new employees where we started and where we are now. The history of being able to say we've had no workplace incidents because we've been clearly communicating the issue. And then one other piece I didn't share earlier, SHRM has had open leave since January of 2019. And so the open leave concept, of course, is no one accrues vacation. When you need to take leave, you take leave. And so very early in 2020, when we all didn't know what was going on and people were sick, it was never an issue. We always say, if you're sick, stay home. And I think that also helped us early in the process as everybody was figuring out what was going on. And then as we continue, so even though we are now returned to office, if someone has a family member that they have to go take care of and they need to be out for 2 weeks, it's not an issue. So we have this other level of flexibility that's already built into our system that makes it much easier to say to employees, look, we are returned to office. And then I know we talked a little bit about culture, but I also want to say early on, we made sure to remind our staff, SHRM is a work from office culture. We've always had certain positions that were 100% remote. And so when they were posted, it said 100% remote position. But we are primarily a work from office culture. And I'd say to all companies, when you're setting up your culture and talking to your people, from the beginning, say what that culture is. Yes, I understand that there are tons of companies that are saying now they're going to be 100% remote. We've not changed our stance. We believe in those opportunities of spontaneity, of ways to build our culture by having people here. And if you're honest and transparent about that from the beginning, people can make a decision about whether this is the culture they want to remain in. My Uber driver this morning was talking about that COVID clarity again. He decided to change his life and do something totally different because COVID gave him that time to think. We've been open with saying to our staff, we understand that that's all part of this process too. And, please talk to us. We'll even help you try to find something that now works for this new clarity you have about how you want to be more intentional about how you work and what you do each day.
Emily, that's just excellent with both the culture and the way you explained what I think Brittany said earlier, right? Take out the ambiguity, good, clear communication that's ongoing, and really an excellent approach. It seems that's been working very well for SHRM. Brittany, how about your organization?
Yeah, it's very similar. Emily really hit a lot of the highlights that I would have said, which is to say we are explaining to new hires and to existing workers that we intend to return to office. September 7th is the magic date. We have a big staff lunch planned. It's, we're viewing it as sort of a day of joy. I'm looking forward to it immensely because not only will I be in the office, but my kids will be at school, and it'll just feel very normal. And I'm really excited about that. And we've said that to new hires. We are currently remote, but we intend to return to at least 3 days a week in office so that we can have those opportunities to collaborate and engage. Something that no matter what and no matter how effective your workforce is, it gets lost in a fully remote environment. And we're ensuring that people feel, again, heard, right? So to the extent there are childcare issues, to the extent maybe some particular school isn't opening fully, we're making sure those conversations are addressed. And we have a similar living, breathing, regularly updated Q&A around our vaccine policy. Questions get added, answers get added.
Sure.
We are looking to sort of tighten it and really not necessarily move to a full mandate, but get as close to a mandate as we can get while recognizing the labor and employment laws and need for accommodations that exist at the state and federal level. And so we are very clear to say this is our policy right now, but we are moving towards a fully return to work in September. And so this likely will change. It will also likely change as we start to attend meetings and events. Another thing I'm really looking forward to doing is getting back to our conferences. And that's going to dictate a new policy, who's able to go, what steps need to be taken prior to arrival, and perhaps testing. And ensuring that our workers who do have the opportunity to attend events in different locations where the COVID numbers might be different, feel comfortable doing so. And so, again, this idea of like of a living, breathing, revised document to point to and saying regularly, this could change, and it probably will change.
Sure. And earlier you brought up equity issues and women, people of color, other essential workers. How have you been able to deal with the disparate groups, not only in yours, but if you recommend for others in your association?
Yeah, I think similar to SHRM, ASA's members are every area of the world, every walk of life, every demographic, every socioeconomic class. And so we really have tried to come up with resources to share with our membership that help our employer members navigate the crisis, regardless of what their workforce looks like and where they are. And so we have been really grateful to be part of the USCIB's Business Partner to Convince. We've shared their resources. We're also part of the Health Action Alliance, which has tremendous employer resources, social media toolkits, do's and don'ts for communicating with your employees, buzzwords to use, buzzwords to avoid, really fascinating science-backed resources around vaccine literacy and health and safety issues. And we have those on our website, and it's free to our members and non-members. We thought it was really important that it not be behind our paywall, because it is just that important. And for our women who've really been hit the hardest with this pandemic, the childcare issue being certainly paramount. We've joined the Health Action Alliance's childhood vaccination campaign, where we're encouraging our members, and ASA itself is implementing policies to ensure flexible scheduling, perhaps paid time off, so that parents, certainly men and women, parents can get their children vaccinated, not just for COVID, but of course all those other vaccines that many went without over the last year and a half, and being able to take that time to care for them in the event that there's any side effects. Because really, children being able to go back to school safely is really the key to many members of our society getting back to work. And so we're looking to share resources around that, and really looking for ways to support our membership and their employees to ensure that that does happen, because that's, I think, really going to be the turning point of this whole thing.
Well, excellent, Brittany, and thank you for bringing up the families that are important also, where vaccination is a big push, of course, and important for back to school safely, and for people not having their kids homesick as well. There's lots that we need to do, and I'm really happy to hear that you're so engaged with those alliances as well, and what we're trying to do with Business Partners to Convince. Emily, I know you continue to do more and more. As I mentioned at the outset, your CEO has been all over the airwaves, pushing the importance of working in this area. What would you like to say on the latest issues?
So I'll say there are three words I wanted to say earlier. So three words: collaboration, flexibility, and empathy. I said grace earlier, but empathy is a word you probably heard my CEO say a lot. And if I can just say, we've talked about creating cultures. That's been one of the things that's important when we talk about this. I've talked to you about people managers being the front line. So as you talk about the people who have been most affected, essential workers, women, people of color, right? Think about making sure your people managers are the front line for all of these efforts. Again, the buck kind of stops with them. So you've got to train them to be proactive, right? And they have to be thinking each day about creating a safe experience for those employees that report to them, free of discrimination and harassment, and that they're clear about opportunities from the beginning. I give this talk to people all the time, and I say, do you ever ask about the org chart in the interview? Because you come in with an expectation of, I want to grow within an organization, and then you feel stunted, like there's no growth. But if you see the org chart and it's pretty flat at the opening, you pretty much know where your growth could possibly be. And so that's one of the things people managers have got to do. And companies should also, of course, we talked about, even in this environment, pay audits got to continue. I know there's so much going on, but our people managers have got to continue to think about the whole individual and think past this, right? This is just one facet of the day-to-day. And again, there are layers of all these other things going on in society that are impacting how our employees are feeling. And so we've got to, there's a lot of pressure on you as a people manager to do that. And so the organizations have got to give them the tools. But I also want leaders and people managers and all of us to stretch our empathy muscle. You'll hear my CEO say this all the time. You've got to be transparent about bright lines. And so our bright line, as I said to you, is we are a work from office culture. And we can show empathy about being flexible if people need to work from home because the schools haven't opened, the children aren't vaccinated. We can get that. But there's got to be a bright line. And then there has to be decisions made, and we can be empathetic about how we make those decisions. But we all have to stretch that muscle. I joke all the time. We talk about our Gallup strengths. My CEO, empathy is number 2 for him. It's number 33 for me. So imagine, right, how far this has tested you as a leader, as a people manager, because you've got to stretch that muscle more every day. And then one other thing I'd like to say to employees is, personally, we've got to stretch and strengthen our personal support systems, because it's very clear where some of us have these systems of people we can call in a pinch. You've got kids the same age as I do. How about, I've got this big meeting today. Can you watch the kids while I've got this big meeting? And then I'll cover for you Friday during your big meeting, right? I think we've lost some of that in terms of because we talk about family support, but community support is so much. And if COVID has shown us anything, so many people who were by themselves living and had no one else, we've got to really be proactive in strengthening our personal support systems. Be just as intentional about that as we are about our professional development and how we make our way in business. Because something like this, something else is going to happen, and we'll have to lean on others. And we gotta, again, give employers grace. They can't solve every problem for us. And so here's a problem to take more ownership of your situation. Here's an opportunity to do that by making sure you see where there are weaknesses in your personal support systems and to strengthen them. So I think we can, again, I talk high level because everyone has a problem. None of us is perfect. And as employers, we can't solve each one. But if we think high level about how we can do that and be empathetic, I think that that's something that we can really benefit from. And one more thing, if you don't mind, I wanted to go back because I know when you talked about what our companies are doing, I know in the news people have heard about what some other companies are doing right now. And if I could just share a couple of things, because what really got me yesterday was Tyson Foods announced that every employee has got to be vaccinated by November. And they were the first of their kind of employer to say that we're going to have this requirement. So I will continue to watch, and I would encourage those on the call to continue to watch what other companies are doing. We hear so much about what's going on the West Coast. Most of us don't live like that. That's a whole other life, right? And so let's look at other companies. Disney is saying, has announced that they're going to be mandating vaccinations for salaried companies, right? Now we heard New York City, we know MTA, that they're going to be doing some things there, city employees and healthcare workers, and now many of the private sector businesses there are following through. So I would say another way to keep abreast of this is to look and see what other companies are doing that are similar to you in your geographic area and things of that nature. So that will help you as you're talking to your employees about the changes you're making.
And Emily and Brittany, I'll ask one last question that also ties into what I'm already seeing in the Q&A, and then we'll address those. The last question is how workplaces can ensure a safe environment now and what they need to require for people to return, including one person in the chat has mentioned how companies can demand employees to take the vaccine and be able to show the proof and still be HIPAA compliant. So is that one of the pieces to ensure a safe environment? So maybe I'll just to you first, Emily, and then Brittany.
Sure. And so again, EEOC, you all remember, pretty much said that employers can require the vaccine, right? And so we know that we're able to do that. But I think that now HRIS systems, that's human resource information systems, now have many tools that will allow you to be able to upload the vaccination information. And then to be clear, initially, we only had that information available to HR. So HR knew who was vaccinated, who wasn't vaccinated. But we do actually now, we have the right to share that with your people manager. And we've now just done so because we're again at this crucial moment of 80% vaccination. We've got this other 20% that we need to manage. And managers need to know in meetings who should be wearing that mask, right? Because I can't hold you accountable for these new rules. And I don't know that you should be having those rules, right? And so we are not running afoul of any HIPAA violations. Remember, we have this requirement to keep our workplaces safe and free from hazards. And And so that's the requirement that is leading us to make these additional decisions about protecting those workers who have been vaccinated, and even protecting the workers that, for whatever reason, health-wise, can't get the vaccination, right? So it is us trying to create the safest environment possible. And we are leading the newest information that we sent out to employees says, here are the laws that we've talked about. Here is the guidance that we have. And you know, we're working on HR association. People can find that information anyway. So we're just being very open and transparent about that. And then I know Brittany mentioned also about conferences and things that are starting now. You know, we're hosting an in-person conference in T-minus, I think, 3 weeks in Vegas, our talent conference. It will be the first, it's a hybrid conference, but we are actually going to have people in person there. And then a few weeks later, our annual conference, which is much larger. So we're even seeing how we communicate to the attendees, similarly doing the same things that we're doing with our employees, with their employees. Now that Vegas has some new rules on our site, you'll see what their local rules are, what CDC is saying. So again, that over information, over communicating to people what the rules are.
Excellent.
Yeah, I agree completely with Emily. Oversharing is not a bad thing these days, right? And pointing to the locality at which you're attending their rules as being the minimum, and then considering what you want to do on top of that. Perhaps the locality has mask mandates, but perhaps you want to ask your attendees to also come with a negative COVID test result. You don't want to be the super spreader event, right? And so ensuring that your attendees feel safe is very, very key. As it relates to your own workplace, I think that HIPAA is something I tell my members, you know, don't worry about HIPAA unless you're bringing your, you know, health insurance company on site to be doing vaccines. HIPAA is not your concern. The ADA and the strict confidentiality provisions within that law is the issue that you need to be focused on. And Emily hit the nail on the head. It's a need to know, right? So your people managers can know vaccine status. And there's certainly an employee relations issue, right? You don't want to create this group and that group in an organization, never a way to go. But unfortunately, in this current environment, you're going to end up with a little bit of that if you have a vaccinated staff and an unvaccinated staff. And there's going to be steps and policies that make sense for your unvaccinated staff, certainly masking and social distancing requirements. And so you have to be ready to grapple with that, and you have to explain, here's why this is the way it is. It's uncomfortable probably, but you can't ignore it, and you can't let certain staff members who perhaps can't be vaccinated for health reasons feel like they're going into an environment that's unsafe. And so, you know, facing those issues head on is really important. And the other thing I would say is, you know, look for those resources that are available. Again, USCIB's resources around vaccine literacy, amazing. Health Action Alliance resources, they're amazing. There's toolkits, there's social media resources that I think are really key, because the thing that we know right about our world right now is we want to feel connected. Social media is super important in doing so, and knowing the right words to use, and encouraging people to talk about their vaccination process. We're hearing is a very effective tool in encouraging those who perhaps haven't been vaccinated to consider doing so. If you know your neighbor had a really good experience and felt pretty good throughout the whole thing, and now feels really protected and feels comfortable going out to dinner again and to birthday parties with their children, those are the stories that you want people to hear. So encouraging that and being a resource for that, on behalf of employers, I think is important as well. And finally, again, as you look at those resources, I can't say enough great things about the Job Accommodation Network, which is a free consulting service for all employers, regardless of size. They provide one-on-one consultation for all aspects of the job as it looks at accommodation ideas, products, referrals and resources, really that ADA compliance piece, which I think is going to be the biggest issue as employers navigate return to work. So, you know, look at Jan's website, take advantage of those resources that are out there. Don't hesitate to reach out to your colleagues that are in the same association, whether it's SHRM or American Staffing Association. You know, reach out, find out what others are doing. People are being really innovative right now, and it's a time for growth, and it's a time for new ideas, and it's a time for support. And so to the extent you can rely on your colleagues and your associations and groups like USCIB, now's the time to do so. This is why we're all here.
Okay,
And
Brittany, I
Scott,
mean,
if I
just
can double, I'm sorry, if I could
please.
just add on to Brittany, my team would kill me if I don't remind everyone here, even if you're not a SHRM member, we've got a great hub zone that we stood up, within weeks of COVID, and it has been continuously updated. And so it's our workplace resource page is available and open. And of course, it's regularly updated with news and some additional research. But also through our relationship with BP2C on your website, there is a link to additional information so you can get it there as well. And as you said earlier, Brittany, early on, we decided to make the COVID information, take it from behind the paywall, right? This was a situation that was so unique, so different, and we wanted everyone to be able to create safe workplaces. And it was so crucial to do so. And we're proud to be able to do that, and it's still available. So I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that.
Oh, no, please. And it's been great, Emily, to hear what SHRM has done and what Brittany mentioned with the American Staffing Association and all the links. I have tried to articulate this globally in a short, less than 700-word article today in the Financial Times, but you all have answered so many great questions, great ideas, innovation. I'm super impressed. But behind that logo that many of you are seeing is another member of our Business Partners to Convince team, Jen Focon, and she's been monitoring the Q&A. And Jen, maybe you can ask one or two questions while we have a few more minutes, please.
Certainly, and thank you for answering many of the questions that have been posted already. We discussed HIPAA quite a bit. We do have some questions from our global attendees. We have folks from across Asia Pacific, Africa, Europe, Caribbean. What advice can you provide to organizations that are tasked with maintaining the health, safety, and welfare of a global workforce?
Wow. So SHRM is global. So we have our SHRM India and MENA offices. And as you all know, right before the Delta variant became what it is here, India experienced a second wave that was heartbreaking. And at one time we had at least it's about 150 staff over there, and at least everyone's family had been touched in some way by COVID. And I tell you, it was great. Our SHRM India CEO, Acha Khanna, communicated with us on a regular basis in terms of what the needs were for the people there, and working remotely was definitely, they were able to do so. Again, they had the technology and they're part of the crisis team, and we were able to discuss ways that they can continue to operate. Look, they did 2 virtual conferences, I don't know how, in the middle of all of this so successfully. And I think also because they had a leader that used the same things we talked about today: over communication, empathy. Right, our CEO reached out to many of those families who were directly impacted to even check on them and to just make sure they were doing okay. I think that's that's a great starting point. But then also making sure there's someone on that team who is aware of local rules and keeping us, compliant in the best, and overly compliant. Right, you always want to do more than you have to do when you're thinking about those situations. But staying connected, communication, showing empathy, those same basic things, I think we also apply to your global colleagues as well, and knowing that there will be some unique needs. We knew at that period of time, things were bad over there, and we were really understanding and providing as much support as we could.
Brittany, anything to add, or another question, Jen, from the?
Yeah, I'll provide another question here. There's a lot of discussion in the chat about employees who will not get vaccinated. And it's an incredibly challenging situation for small businesses as well as large. And you've touched on this, but can you provide some practical advice as to how to have some of those tougher discussions and how to manage some of these new testing requirements?
From ASA's perspective, again, we point largely to existing guidance, right? Because that takes the ambiguity. It doesn't feel like your employer is doing it this way. In fact, it just feels like your employer is following the federal or state guidelines around health and safety and vaccine mandates. The EEOC put out updated vaccination guidance under their ADA compliance guidelines. It's section K in the document around vaccines. Read that, send that to your employees so they can see where the parameters are. But I think level setting and starting off by saying, to the extent you're mandating the vaccine, we are permitted by law to require it, and we will accommodate documented medical or religious exemptions, but otherwise, we will, this is a mandate, and we are doing it for the following reasons, I think is really important at the outset, and ensuring that your employees know the steps to follow should they have a legitimate medical reason not to get the vaccine, and then also ensuring that relevant staff members, managers, et cetera, are trained around that accommodation piece and that conversation, knowing the confidentiality requirements under the ADA, and ensuring that only those with a need to know are involved in the process. Read that EEOC guidance, because it was revised in the current environment. It talks about how COVID is considered, a sufficient threat to the workforce such that it can be considered a business necessity to require the mandate. Having those tools in your conversation is going to be really key to show that this is not just you, feeling like you want the employees to be vaccinated. In fact, it's supported by the science, and it's supported by the legal guidance that's out there.
Thanks, Brittany. And the last word, Emery, on over communication. Anything you'd like to add on that? And then I'm going to go to a final slide that answers some other questions as well.
No, I would say continue to watch how other companies are doing this. I think the Tysons is because think about that, right? There is such close quarters there. It's a business necessity for them. They were so hard hit. They don't want that liability again. And again, the people managers over communicating, this may not end well for that employee, right? But we all have our own options. And we can be empathetic and understand them, but we've also got to explain to them that there's a business necessity behind this, and it's definitely not personal. And we can, again, do things like help them find a situation that works for them. We have this thing here, we call it red carpet in, red carpet out. It doesn't have to be contentious in terms of how we end our relationship. If the safety and well-being of others is not really a concern for that person, we can definitely try to find some other situation for them.
Well, thank you. I mean, that's well articulated, from the red carpet in and red carpet out. And I'd say that for everybody who's been on this call. We're going to switch to the last slide, which a couple people have asked, what are guiding principles? What do they look like? And we've put together with Business Partners to Convince a global COVID-19 workplace challenge, which basically has principles of what we think a workplace could do, as well as tools. That's on the website. The poster on the right basically has the 6 pieces on the left. Listen to employees, follow the latest public health guidance to protect myself, my employees, my workplace, my customers, and my community. Was loud and clear by both Emily and Brittany. Promote vaccine literacy based on the latest science, encourage vaccine confidence, advocate for accessible, equitable, and timely vaccination of employees, and engage with communities, schools, faith-based organizations, other public health leaders to stop the spread. We think these are simple principles. We have a number of companies around the world who've been joining this, from large to small. We're pleased with ASA and others, I think, have articulated this and are diffusing this amongst their groups. This is meant to be open and inclusionary, and I think, as mentioned with both Brittany and Emily, we're both all connected with this website to the great SHRM materials and ASA materials. Vice versa, we're updating as need be. There's news, of course, today of what's happening now in New York City and others on many of these new verifications. We're keeping on top of that. I've never, if I can say, had such great articulation from 2 great guests today. Brittany, just, terrific, obvious knowledge, not only of the legal aspect, but the reality with ASA. And Brittany, with the work you've been doing and sharing that. I think we're all looking forward to more of that. And Emily, your activities with SHRM, notwithstanding the culture that you've built, the communication that you've shared, the work of your whole team, and thank you for bringing up what happened in India and the global remit. We really look forward to continuing to hear more from SHRM, working together, and are really eager to have you both as part of our steering committee, but also in this effort that we all need globally. So with that, I think we're right at the top of the hour. Again, I want to thank the speakers. Never been as great as possible. Thank Jen Falcon for all the great work hidden behind the logo, amongst the many other people that are in the background. We're in this together, and we really hope everybody stays safe, be well, and do the best you can with your personal lives, your communities, and your organizations to encourage vaccination and encourage how we'll be back to a world that I think we've articulated throughout this call of meetings and understanding and the happiness and well-being that we strive for. So again, thank all of you for joining. I know this has been recorded. If people are seeing this in the future, I know we will put information both on the Business Partners to Convince Workplace Challenge, how to get in touch with ASA as well as SHRM, as well as ongoing ways to advance our plight together. So again, thank you all. I'm going to host right to the 10 o'clock time. Emily, Brittany, any last words to the group? If not, we'll close it off with a thanks again.
Thanks for having us, Scott.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Okay, thanks everyone. I think we could shut the recording and blow it up.
Perfect.
Thank you.